All right, friends, welcome back again to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. Our YouTube channel is dedicated to all things Bannerlord related, and especially advanced battlefield command and tactics. And at this moment, we are dedicated to the final stages of this asteroid campaign, where we are taking a sort of parallel journey, simulating that we are on the Napoleonic Invasion and then campaign fallback, or what we will now call retreat from Russia. At this stage, it is a retreat. Napoleon's goals of capturing Moscow and getting Alexander I to capitulate and sign a favorable peace treaty have failed, and the Napoleonic army, some 100,000 strong that left Moscow, is now severely suffering in the Russian winter, right? This is an anthropomorphic thing. It really is like a person, this Russian winter, and we will be talking about that as well as some of the things that happened along the way out. Of course, at this stage we are at Smolensk. Of course, I changed the name of this castle. I think this is normally Kranerog Castle, and we helped a band of Aserai actually take this, just because we are making sure that there are a few titanic battles along the way in this campaign to simulate some of the things that Napoleon was dealing with. This is indeed one of the most severe wars of attrition. Now, we're carting along all these prisoners here, but that's of no consequence. What you need to know is before this episode started, I spreaded our troops out so that we would start to heal faster, because battle is coming, winter is coming, and so is desertion and the effects of disease and the cold. I'll talk more about that as I show you some of the route here, right? Really setting the stage, hopefully getting you guys sort of into the role-playing that we are trudging our way through terrible blizzards. The Rasputita, right, which is the Russian term for the season of mud, is actually still present, right? Sometimes it would rain. Of course, we're looking at Paris here, which is actually Poros in the actual game. This map, what I'm about to drag you on, is roughly what the map looks like in real life, right? Warsaw to the east. Further east is the Niemen River. Down here we have Borisov. We're heading in this direction. The Beresina River, right? Anybody who's a fan of Napoleon will recognize a lot of these names. And we are going to take our army through this perilous valley and deal with whatever we deal with here, right? Now, we do have victory conditions for this campaign. This is, of course, a made-up campaign. Just to finish this campaign in style, we are having this war of attrition and role-playing a little bit that we are in the shoes of one of the greatest war leaders in the history of the world, what we would do in similar situations to try to survive. Now, we're going to hit villages all along the way here, right? We're going to continue to order them to give us troops. Now, that was not a thing in the real Napoleonic army, but I am taking advantage of small game mechanics like that because we are suffering other effects that they didn't have to deal with. Now, I want to change a party leader here. Where is this healer? I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's a fucking healer. That's who he is. We're going to switch out Rema. I temporarily put Rema in charge of one of the armies because, if you didn't catch it in the last episode, we lost our healing companion, Talia Willowbark, with incredibly high medicine skill, is gone. In fact, in successive battles at Smolensk and also at Vyazma, we lost our healer companions. Apologies for that little fading memory here as I get older, fellas. All right, so the Aserai forces are still present, which is nice because in theory they're going to help us. Now, this little force ahead of us is getting swallowed up, but in theory the Aserai here is sort of simulating that they're the Polish or the Austrians kind of on Napoleon's flank as he's escaping or hoping to escape from Russia, right? I'm not going to blow the whole story for you fellas. In case you don't know, you guys can just sort of learn the history as we trudge through here. Now, we're nearing a weather checkpoint, or more accurately, I guess one of the, we'll call them disease desertion checkpoints. I'll explain that more in a second. But we're going to have deserters, and we're going to expend food beyond what the natural game causes you to use, right? I've been using that mechanic throughout this campaign, and the main reason we're doing that, of course, is that the actual game is way too friendly when it comes to food storage and food use, presumably to keep people from suffering really bad attrition and desertion. So the Asura are actually sieging here, and I'm going to pause this to bring this page up. Basically, I know I'm going to do this in the after editing to show you my choices as a commander. I can essentially give our troops more food at the risk or at the benefit of having less deserters, or less food on various levels, all the way down to no food, and then suffer commensurately high deserters. That choice is up to me. And right now, we still have enough food that I'm going to give our troops the strongest amount of rations in order to preserve our army as best we can. Again, I continue to dump some of these low-level troops. These are essentially rules that I made for myself to make this difficult that I'm now trying to follow. I can tell you there's going to be at least one more of these checkpoints, and food is starting to become a little dear. Although we'll see. Maybe this effect is not going to be as severe as I had thought. Obviously, there may not be that many more battles. There will be 2 more battles for sure, because we have to fight our way through Krasny and Borisov at the Berezina River. Now, this companion right here, I'm basically keeping a bunch of low-level troops, and that is because I'm going to use his troops effectively to be our deserters. Again, we're simulating that with the cold, with the horrific conditions, we're getting lots of deserters. That happened to Napoleon, and we will simulate that here. After this, so I'm just going to dump 75 troops here, count it out. These guys will be dispatched into the wilderness, and we will move on towards Krasny. I want to talk about Krasny because there was a battle there, and more accurately, it's often termed as a battle. There were 6 or 7 battles at Krasny. It was kind of a rolling 5-day battle there in which the Russians made repeated assaults on Napoleon's forces. So I'm also going to dump 6,000 food, again, to keep up with that other part of it. And I thought I had a bunch of sheep and shit. Did I drop them? That would be a disaster. Fuck, where the fuck are they? Oh, here we go. Thank goodness. I thought we kept all this cattle this whole time and had a herding penalty so that we could eat all the animals. And of course, Napoleon's army was definitely doing that. They had herds of cattle and whatnot, especially in the early stages after they left Moscow. And looks like meat's back on the menus, boys, right? Like have some pig and some steak and whatnot. Of course, you'd have professional butchers and professional cooks to make sure that the troops ate stew and whatnot along the way. At this stage, we're still eating pretty well. I can tell you that the Napoleonic army was starting to suffer a little bit more than ours, and I will have plenty of time to talk about that in this episode. This may be the last episode for this. I'm not sure. Narrate these live. We'll just have to see how the flow is. So first, let's talk about Krasny. We'll just do some of this marginal stuff here. I'm not going to explain it. Again, Krasny happened over about 5 days. Sometimes it's termed the Battle of Krasnoye. This happened in part for 2 reasons. First, lack of information. Napoleon wasn't quite sure where Kutuzov was. He was actually further west than Napoleon thought, and that allowed Kutuzov to angle up and make several attacks, or more accurately, armies that were under Kutuzov's control, right? There was the main Russian army under Kutuzov, and there were several other armies. Now, by the way, part of the reason that I'm setting Borisov as the final challenge, I'm hoping that there's a huge amount of battalions down here, which is going to make it very similar to what Napoleon dealt with. Just for those wondering, that is strategic. When I was setting this up, I set that up because I figured there'll be lots of battalions there since they only have the one city and one castle. All right, so the Battle of Krasny, the skirmishes, the over 5 days, partly also happened because Napoleon had this misinformation. Again, information is so important for a commander, and Napoleon just didn't have good information. His cavalry, as I've already mentioned, were suffering terrible losses because of the weather, the lack of fodder, the Russian winter, and the fact that the Russians intentionally burned much of the grass and fodder. Right? They were doing raised ground tactics to stop Napoleon. So, Napoleon dispatched his 50 or 60,000 troops after they left Smolensk in groups, and essentially they were separated by a full day's march. So this is 40 to 60,000 fighting troops with maybe 100,000 stragglers, right? Don't forget the stragglers, they're important to this story, and so I'll mention them from time to time. So over the course of 5 days, these armies come out. It's Marshal Davout, and then it's the Old Guard and Napoleon. I want to talk more about the Old Guard, of course. Oh, shit. Okay, so Krasny is going to be a battle, which is great, right? We're going to have an actual big battle here. Who knows how many are actually going to be there as troops come in and out of the city here. But this was intentional too, right? The Western Empire only has 2 cities, and so of course they have tons of armies here. I see there's a Battanian army in there as well. This is going to get hairy, trying to siege this city. Actually, you know what? They may just sally out against us and we'll have an open field battle. Either way, we're going to have battles here, which is perfect. All right, so let's continue our conversation about Krasny. So Napoleon's army was spread out, right? In the rear guard was Marshal Ney, and we'll talk about him hopefully at this episode or later in this episode. It kind of depends on how much time I have here. I don't want to just sit in the town and have a monologue for 20 minutes because I think I'll lose some of your attention. So we will continue to progress here, try to figure out what to do, and I will intersperse strategy with this historical dialogue. All right, so the French army is stretched out, and the Russians realized this, and they started positioning armies to try to attack them. They were shelling French armies. They would set up artillery at a safe distance from the road where the French were passing, and they would shell them, right, adding basically terror to the French. And this is a really good way for me to sort of have a little storytelling here. As the French would come into villages, of course, the villagers would either disperse, hide their food, or once in a while the French would come in and they would actually send Polish commanders, and the citizens were a lot more friendly to Polish commanders, especially once they told them in Russian that they were all Christians and that they would like to buy some food, right? A lot of times they had a much better response from the Russian citizens when they said, look, we would like to buy some food. Of course, the Russian kings and oligarchs were very harsh to their serfs, and so some of them actually welcomed the French invasion, or at least they weren't hugely averse to it like a lot of people might be. All right, so I'll continue here with Krasny. I'm kind of jumping around subjects here because I'm trying to sort of maintain a collective dialogue here and not bore you guys too much. The Russians are shelling the French as they move along. They're making intermittent sort of feint attacks, right? The French army is unquestionably more trained, more disciplined, and better equipped to handle an open field battle at this stage than the Russians. So the Russians are committed to guerrilla warfare. And look at this unrealistic shit. There's a watermelon here and a melon. As a gardener, I can tell you, cut! Get this guy's camel's head out of my way here. You're fucking with my shot. As a gardener, I can assure you that when it's snowing, you have no watermelon, not unless you have air freight like we do today. So I digress here. You can see my mind is a little ADHD. So the Russians are providing these little attacks, and the reason they're doing that is because Kutuzov doesn't want another Borodino. He doesn't want another Russian slaughter where the Russian army gets destroyed. So he's committing to these guerrilla warfare attacks. There's actually more troops in the city now. That is highly distressing. We might stall here a few days and hope some of these armies leave. There I saw a couple of the armies come out, but we need several of them to leave. I'm not sure we can siege a city with 5,000 people in it. So Kutuzov, the main general in charge of the Russians, I've mentioned him before, he frankly got his ass kicked at Borodino, right? The Russians, they're just inferior army to the French. The French were this juggernaut Grande Armée, and he didn't want to have another repeat of Borodino. He couldn't afford it. Oh, motherfucker, I just lost a mercenary. Talk about bad timing. Yeah, and this is kind of good. I gotta get the leader. You can order the leader immediately. If you can talk to the leader immediately, you can make them join your army again. And because of that, I should have mentioned this before. Important fact here. Ding, ding, ding. If you're playing and you're watching this and you don't know this, most people do. You want to make sure that you keep the leader of that mercenary party in your army. So as soon as they leave you, I can't find him here. As soon as they leave you, here he is. You can tell them, yeah. No, I want to pay you more than whoever was just trying to pay you. Come back to us. Unfortunately, these little armies are going to leave us. They can't be added to the army because they're too small. Yeah, all 3 of those armies are just going to disperse. But it is what it is. So we'll add that to the war of attrition here. We're suffering all kinds of unfortunate occurrences, including a highly defended Krasny. This is actually optimal. Because at this stage, it's good for you to know that the Russians outnumbered the French by somewhere like 3 or 4 to 1. Now, those armies were separated, and the Russians weren't really sure that they outnumbered their opponent that badly. And don't forget, Kutuzov is a little bit once bitten, twice shy. He's a little afraid of Napoleon, like a lot of people. The aura of Napoleon scared a lot of people to death. I'm trying to bait some of these guys here. This guy just died. He went way too far, so we captured him, hopefully. Beautiful. Pulled in his friend here. So a little guerrilla warfare here as we abuse some of these small armies. I'm actually able to bait them with these lake rat units that left our army. They're serving some purpose here, baiting some of these armies. So the Russians committed to several engagements, and as they learned that their engagements were having success, they continued to attack the French. It was basically like they were sort of feeling out the French strength, and as the French didn't show an overwhelming return of power, Kutuzov and his other generals, they were always trying to convince him, most of them anyways, we should attack. We should destroy Napoleon right now. Everybody all out attack. We've got this motherfucker. And Kutuzov said no. Right, he also probably had orders from Alexander to not attack, but that's uncertain as well. I think this is as good as it's going to get. There's fucking 4,500 troops in here, and they won't leave. Look at the garrison has 700. There's 800 militia here. This is going to be a hellacious siege. I got more troops trying to come in here. Fuck no, right? We're going to sick them with our attack dog. Sick them, Arwa. You bitches are caught. She's going to catch... Okay, we caught him. Hopefully, okay, we just captured all those three, so we'll be able to drag them in as well. So I'll mention a few of the critical things that happened, and then hopefully after this battle, I'll be able, or maybe during the battle if it's slow, which I doubt, I'll be able to give you guys a few anecdotal stories. Again, you need to know that the armies were spread out, separated. Napoleon, however, still had the Old Guard. And 30 seconds about the Old Guard here if you don't know anything about it. The Old Guard was comprised of between 10 and 15,000, sometimes as high as 20,000 soldiers. And these were basically the biggest, baddest, most elite guys in Napoleon's army. They were called the Old Guard because, of course, many of them had been with him for 5, 10, 15 years of war. So these guys were hardy, muskets being fired at them. You know, they had no fear. They had all the success with Napoleon, and so these guys were basically walking hard-ons, just giant erections of warfare, ready to attack anything, unafraid of anything. And Napoleon kept these guys near him because of that power, right? He basically kept them the same way that war leaders throughout history have kept sort of an elite reserve unit. Incidentally, at the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon refused to commit the Old Guard. At critical points, some of his generals were begging him, we should use the Old Guard here. If you remember the Battle of Borodino, the French were already winning. There's some historians, some military tacticians that believe if Napoleon committed the Old Guard, especially in an aggressive enveloping maneuver with cavalry, they might have been able to capture and destroy the entire Russian army, but Napoleon repeatedly refused. I think for good reason, right? He was obviously concerned, being 1,500 miles away from Paris, that his whole army would be destroyed if the Russian forces were larger or something bad happened. So he refused to commit the Old Guard. Well, now he had them at Krasny, and every time that Napoleon's army was menaced, the Old Guard would just march in perfect marching order, thick columns with their bearskin hats or bear fur hats. There's a quote that I want to make at some point, and here I'm just putting some of the best troops on Wazuban, because I want to make sure, right, that for battle here we have our absolutely best troops with the most hit points, right? Wazuban gets extra hit points, so we want our infantry and cavalry, especially our elite vanguard Ferris, to have the most hit points. Hence, I'm putting them on Wazuban and archers into Arwa's party. She doesn't give the troops much extra hit points. Wazuban does, so we want to take advantage of that fact, right? We need these extra hit points. They may sally out, or this might just be a really bloody siege. We shall see. All right, so we got a siege, I guess. Well, we could just build some siege weapons here and engage in a siege here. Okay, here we go. They have sallied out, motherfucker. So it's 4,000. It's not quite as many because the militia doesn't come, but this is still going to be a bitch. The silver lining here is there's a very good shot. This is at a river. You can almost call this the battle at the Beresina River because it's probably going to be at a river here, and we are defending. Those two facts give us a good chance to win here. So again, repeatedly, the Russians would menace Napoleon and his forces, but the Old Guard laughed at them. They were just like, Come get it, you bitches. And the Russians were intimidated by that. In fact, there's a great quote I want to read later on about that fact when the Russians were sort of menacing and trying to intimidate, you know, they were posturing like guys in a bar, like, I'm going to kick your ass, I'm going to capture you, Napoleon. And the old guard, well, I'll read the quote to you guys, but it's great stuff. Let's get to tactics here. In fact, let me sit up in my seat and prepare for this shit, because if we lose, we go home, right? This campaign ends, and as glorious and as fun and as exciting as been so far, obviously I really want to succeed in this final challenge, this final act of this campaign. All right, so let's do some strategy here. Let me see what I can come up with. All right, it's going to be a very long battle at the bridge here. I'm going to have reserve units. I'm going to have a single shock troop division ready at all times, the 6th Corps. I'm changing some of my normal divisions here, and you'll see in a moment why I'm going to do that. I want a Cav Corps to block some of the incoming projectile units. I want a solid crossbow division here, the 4th, almost all crossbow, right? That way those guys can shield wall. They will run out of ammo early on, and we will attack with them in melee, right? Those guys all turn into pretty damn good infantry units. And we will use them. Meanwhile, the 5th Corps here, anchored by Coraine. Look at that fucking list of perks, right? Just a giant list. She's an archer. She'll give them some nice perks. The 6th Corps is going to be the shock troop unit, so I'm going to put some of our best infantry in there with good perks. The 1st Corps is actually going to be a skirmishing unit. This battle, I'm gonna fight things a little differently, and it's because we're at a bridge. We're going to be able to create a funnel, and I'm going to use a lot of our skirmishers here to pelt the enemy with javelins. We're not actually going to use the 1st Division as a square like you see me do all the time. We're going to use the 2nd Division of cavalry on the bridge, and that's because I want to create a traffic jam on the bridge, right? We're going to rush to the bridge, get troops positioned on it, and have a cavalry division in the middle. Not too big, too. I want it to be 30 guys or so, right? So we'll configure some of this. The 7th is going to be a reserve archer unit. I'm just going to put these guys at the back on hold fire and understand that these guys are not going to do anything for the first 10 minutes of this battle, maybe longer. We'll have to see how it goes. Now, I need a good captain here for them. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good archer captain. Damn it. I don't want to waste your time. Wait, here we go. Baronet the Black is perfect, so that'll work. So the 7th and 8th Corps are going to be fully reserve units, just like Napoleon, right? We're going to keep these old guard units at the back. That's the 6th. Those are our shock troop divisions. And let's see what the 3rd and 2nd look like. So Cav, 2nd, 3rd. The 3rd Corps is going to be a shield wall protection for the archers. We'll put them on the right, basically protecting the archers. It essentially creates the same effect of being on castle walls, where a lot of the enemy arrows hit the walls instead of hitting your troops. 7th and 8th in reserve. Again, I want the 2nd Corps to be about 30 men. That's because I want a little bit of the enemy to slip by. That way they kind of make it through the maelstrom right into our shock troops. Meanwhile, the 1st Division, like I said, is going to be, I don't want this many shock troops in here. We'll shrink this. Is going to be a skirmisher division, because I want these guys dumping their javelins into the enemy as well, right? They will be positioned kind of like that. The 2nd Division in a square in front of them on the bridge, and then the 6th Corps behind them. I guess you would say cycle charging. 5th archers on the right or the left, and the 4th crossbow, like 100 guys here on the right. Obviously, tons of tactics at a bridge, and we need to execute here, right? Don't forget, we can't just win this battle. We need to win this soundly, because we're in hostile territory, surrounded by tons of enemies. There might even be large armies, and we're facing a siege after this. This campaign is far from over, and it's going to get harder, progressively harder along the way. I'm adjust a couple settings here. In fact, let's brighten up the colors of these guys so you can actually see our units. We've got kind of a rainbow sunrise here. It's pretty. So the 3rd Corps blocking again, the 2nd on the bridge in a square, the 1st in a long skirmisher line in a shield wall, and then these 2 archer divisions, the 4th and the 5th, on both flanks of the bridge to pound the enemy with enfilade fire. All right, now initially here we'll hold fire. We'll just absorb some arrows and assess what kind of forces the enemy have. The enemy will mostly have cavalry early on here. Actually, they've got quite a few infantry and archers, which is fine. I'm surprised they don't have all cavalry. Archers are working. This is the skirmishers, the 6th Corps. Those guys are ready to charge, right? I'm basically going to keep them right behind our shield wall infantry, and let's come get some, bitches, right? Like, fire this shit up. I got to ramp up my own intensity level here a couple notches, because this is for all the marbles. Look at that guy's weird fucking, I don't know what to call it. He's got like a flag on his camel sticking up out of the back. He's got like this big cobra head. Sure, that's some kind of graphics bug. And commence the killing here, right? Archers on both sides. Skirmishers are firing javelins. Even this 6th Corps is going to be able to throw a bunch of throwing axes. Any of their cavalry that come through is going to meet with this absolutely crushing wave of palace guards. These guys are going to get butchered, and I'm going to help these other divisions clear out the guys in the rest here. Now these, the 7th and 8th, let's use these guys, right? What we can do here is actually use the 8th in a circle. That'll give the archers protection. Stick the archers in the middle of the circle. On hold fire in a square, and what that'll do is just essentially create an object that the enemy gets stuck on as they're bringing some cavalry through here. Optimally, the enemy would have no cavalry through here, but evidently they've been able to sneak a few through some of the gaps. Fucking assholes. The death spam looks great, right? I mean, that's about as good as it can look. And this is, advantage us, right? We are defending a bridgehead with a very good tactical plan, if I do say so myself. Shit, their infantry's coming through over here. It's kind of attacking our 5th Corps, but our palace guards are right here. And again, I'm just going to take this 6th Corps, have them charge in one moment, and then we'll pull them back the next, right? Basically, I want them to attack, but not cross the bridge. I want us being sort of cautiously aggressive with those guys. The 3rd Division's in front here, right? So those guys are helping block arrows from the enemy. That's why the death spam looks so good. The enemy archers have no cover, no protection. Ours do. And of course, their cavalry is coming into the most horrific maelstrom known to humankind right here. This is a complete maelstrom of doom. Nobody survives this. All right, getting some infantry reinforcements. I don't know, that's not a great sign to have reinforcements already. I haven't noticed a lot of death, but maybe when I was given orders or something, there was a wave. The enemy's got a handful of troops sort of coming through here, which is fine. I just can't allow 200 cavalry to come through. 10, 12 guys is actually just fine, right? Because they'll get butchered, shot off their horses, or mown down by shock troops. All right, so we're going to stick the 3rd now, the 3rd Division of Cavalry, onto the bridge, right? That's because I can't just have a wide open bridge. We lose all our tactical advantage. And then I have these 2 different archer divisions to essentially hold fire now. The 2nd is reinforcement archers, and we can have these guys hold fire, right? It's 8th Corps in here. Basically, again, I'm just going to protect these guys. At times, I might even just stick shock troops in the circle here with the 7th Corps. That way these guys have a guy with an axe standing next to them. So not only is the enemy slowed down, like this guy here, if they get in the circle, there's fucking axe murderers in there, right? This is a bad situation for the enemy cavalry. And of course, they're not going to come in there 100 at a time. It'll be like 6 at a time, and mass murder will commence. All right, so a lot of these crossbow are still shooting, but I do see some guys holding their shield. Those guys are going to run out of ammo first, and we will charge with them, right? They will become infantry. I'm actually going to pull the 1st Division and 6th Division back and let that 4th Corps charge, because sergeant crossbow and a shield wall do really well as infantry, especially in a tight knot like that, right? They're all swinging their maces, and everything they hit gets fucking, like the Matrix song, gets fucking clubbed to death. The archers over here continue to work. Right? And again, you have to remember that we have reserve units here. Just like Napoleon, we are being very thoughtful with the disposition of our army, with the expelling of our ammunition here, right? Just like Napoleon, we're keeping reserve divisions of artillery to make sure that if there's a bad moment, I can bring this 100 archers up, this 100 elite archers in the 7th Corps up here to shred everything. These guys are now starting to fire as well. The 2nd Division is ready to shoot at a moment's notice, and we want to stop this flood, right? This is more cav than I want coming across, right? So we can start pushing cavalry onto the bridge here and try to bottle them up. The good news is they're already down to tier 4 and 5 units, right? They don't have elite tier 6 units anymore. They're all dead. All right, let's get this circle cleaned up just a bit. It's a little bigger than I want, but it's fine, right? That square, you can see that Archer Corps just holding in there. And again, 1st Division, I'm going to keep pulling it back. Attack and pull back because I want the enemy fighting close to this side of the bridge, of this side of the two bridge entrances. The reason for that's simple. I want all these guys shooting these guys, the enemy forces, at closer range. If you're across the bridge, not only, of course, does the enemy archer shoot your guys closer and do more damage, but your archers have a longer shot to find the enemy's flesh. Here, they're shooting at like 70 feet away, and it's scoring a lot of damage. The enemy has a few pathetic horsemen that are making their way through, and of course, they're immediately destroyed. A lot of these archers are just standing here. We'll have to charge with them soon, but we will put shock troops and archers like this behind shield walls when they charge. Shit, they've got a bunch of infantry plowing through here, killing our archers. I think this is an opportunity too for Wazuban to get on foot, right? Teach some of these Imperial Malavliatons a lesson here. With he's still wielding his sledgehammer, but I think it's going to be highly effective here against units that have, that don't have this kind of weapon speed. If you've never used a hammer, they're incredibly fast, and they do enough damage to be lethal in Bannerlord. A very highly custom crafted two-handed weapon, in my opinion, is actually one of the best weapons in the game. If you get a really long, fast hammer, it's completely lethal. You're hitting two guys at once, you're knocking guys to the ground. It's very fast. You do more damage to high-level troops, and the effectiveness of it is remarkable. All right, shock troops piled up there. Our archers are shooting over their shoulder, shredding everything in sight, and so far, so good, right? The enemy's bottled up. They're facing shock troops. All I see is axes and Manavlions bobbing up and down as they eviscerate everything in sight. The archers that still have ammo are scorching stuff here. Skirmishers are throwing javelins. Horse archers are shooting over here. This enemy is fucking dead, right? We'll send the 1st Division in here. We're just kind of alternating between troops because I'm trying to keep troops fresh and not have them killed and have their hit points get knocked to 0. I'll join them here with the aforementioned hammer and crush this force of Western Empire. There's some Sturgeon units even in here. There's Sturgeon and Battanian units in here as well as Western Empire. So this is great, right? This is effectively our simulation here for the Battle of Krasny. Obviously, it's nowhere near the same, but so far, so fucking good. In fact, if it continues to be this bad of a slaughter, I think I will talk a little bit more about the actual battles of Krasny and tell you a few more of the anecdotal things that I found really fascinating. I am going to read verbatim the quote by this partisan leader of the Russians. Partisan leader is basically like a militia leader of the engagement where they engaged the Old Guard, because it's one of the best, and it's most often quoted, but it's also one of the best quotes to illustrate the power of Napoleon's Old Guard and this incredible French army. In the meanwhile, though, we can talk more about Krasny. So again, over the course of 5 days, this army left Smolensk. Unfortunately, the units that got there last, Marshal Ney, and some of the other units, they got no food. When units initially arrived at Smolensk, a lot of them were starving. They were cold. They were hungry. They probably sought out some sex, a bed, and lots of food. And the troops that came in latest, the rear guard, which Marshal Ney was leading. The rear guard is, of course, the army that's at the back of a large army like Napoleon had. They got very little food and supplies when they arrived at Smolensk. And as soon as other units were leaving, they were just getting to Smolensk, right? So their troops needed rest. 4 days after the rest of the army had left, Marshal Ney left Krasny, and they eventually got cut off from the rest of the French, right? Units of, I don't remember all the Russian general names. I don't have them like written down in front of me, of course, because I'm trying to not to get killed here in a huge battle. And apologies for those who want me to talk strictly about tactics. Our channel has just loads of tactics, to use your English terms. Get up. There's no need for me to enumerate and say every single part of tactics here, since most of it I've already explained, and we have the enemy in an absolute death chamber here, right? Whatever troops come through are just barely wading through, and they are getting butchered. It's an absolute fucking massacre. So at Krasny, again, Marshal Ney comes up last, and he finds instead of promised help from other units of the Russian army, he finds 50 or 60,000 Russians blocking the road. Cannons, the whole 9 yards. Let's get offensive here. We got all these infantry making an aggressive push. The enemy looks like they're reforming. They might even break if we can really fucking thrust it on. Let's push their shit in here hard. Let's get some archers split up here in our left flank here. I'll get back to that story in just a second, and let's advance. Let's get the 2nd, 7th, 8th. The 8th cab will have circle around to the far side. The 3rd cab can be in shield wall to plow the road. They have a bunch of units setting up there for defense, it looks like, but we're going to fucking storm that shit. Fuck you, bitches. All right, so Marshal Ney's cut off. His 15,000, maybe it's down to 10,000 rear guard at this stage, is surrounded, shelled, hammered with fucking horrific cannon fire by the Russians. They're starting to get decimated, and the Russians are offering surrender terms. Basically, you're all dead. You might as well surrender, and you know, especially the officers would be well treated. There'd be ransoms and prisoner trades and all that shit. And Marshal Ney, fuck you. I don't know how to say fuck you in French. I should have learned probably before this series. Fuck you, we're not surrendering, right? So the Russians, again, they're like, we have 60,000 here, we're going to kill all of you. So Marshal Ney fights to the death. Once it's nighttime, and of course they didn't fight truly to the death. Yeah, these bitches want to fight. Good, come get some, you bitches. Marshal Ney escapes, right? They commit to this incredibly risky escape. He actually tells his men and officers, we're going to cross the Dnieper River. And this is a fucking frozen, icy cold river with steep banks. These men are not going to build a bridge. They're going to fucking ford this river probably at night. I don't know the exact conditions. I just know the stories from his officers were they were shocked. People were stunned. They're like, we're all dead. We're going to die if we do that. There's 60,000 Russians. They're attacking us, and you want us at night with freezing conditions to cross a frozen river and swim a river with their muskets and shit like that. And Marshal Ney said, yep, that's what we're doing. If you guys don't want to come with, I'll fucking do it on my own, you pussies. And after being thoroughly chastised like that, a lot of them said, okay, I guess we'll do this. Well, something like 3/4 of the men did die. Between the shelling of the Russians and the river, they drowned. But Marshal Ney eventually helped them escape. Now, I'm going to cut that story off here because we are wrapping up a destructive assault here. I've got the 1st Division just face-to-face with their infantry. I've systematically moved a division of cavalry and archers to the left. I've got shock troops behind me, and we are going to surround and annihilate this fucking insolent Western Empire forces. Let's go, bitches. All right, bringing 6th Corps up behind me. The 8th Corps is also here. We're spreading out archers to effectively annihilate their retreat. Nobody's getting out of here alive. The 8th Corps is on our left flank pushing in, and in we go. I got tons of health. This fucking Western Empire force attacked us here at Krasny, just like Napoleon's rear guard. We are going to fucking show them what a professional army can do to fucking pretenders and destroy this force. Get up here, shock troops. I've called these guys in. There's going to be losses. Of course, they're charging 600 troops. But the rest of our forces are getting into position. The infantry's boring in on them. And this force is going to break. We're surrounding this force. Archers, you can't actually see them over there. But the 7th Corps is spreading out towards this enemy's right. In other words, towards the right where I'm standing right now. This force is being surrounded. They're not going to have any angles to retreat. They are trying to retreat. The archers are now shooting. You can see them over the horizon there, raining in deadly fire. We're going to continue to sort of triangulate the retreat approach here. That way none of these forces survive. I mean, we can't annihilate all of them. They're retreating pretty quickly here, but this battle is fucking over. We've got cav shield walls leading our fucking advanced guard here. We're plowing the road. Shock troops are in here. The 1st, 6th, and 2nd is charging with me. And we're just boring through this fucking Western Empire force. This combination force of Russians, just like Napoleon's old guard, right? Just plowing the road, committing mass murder, and showing the beauty of tactics in Bannerlord. I mean, this is just fucking beautiful. Sometimes when I have battles like this where things get choreographed and things work out beautifully, it really does feel like a symphony of death. The enemy is all these camels just trample everything. They're being stampeded. Troops are roaring. I mean, we're still suffering losses here, right? They've got a little bit of a defensive position there, but I've got archers now on their flank, and we are just boring in with this unstoppable train. The lighting is beautiful. It's snowing, so it feels a little bit like the Battle of Krasny probably faced, or probably was. I've got a companion out here throwing javelins, leading the way. I fucking love it. Of course, these companions have been in our army the last 4 months, right? You grow attached to these people. Asta Longknife, this skirmisher division leading gal. She's kind of attractive, right? She's got some nice red hair. She's got a fit body because she's out here fighting, right? I'm sure she looks amazing in a dress, right? I've heard she's got a great personality, right? I'll always tell you fellas, an attractive woman is nice, but a woman with personality is worth 1,000 points on their looks, right? Do not sacrifice that personality for looks, right? You will find plenty of incredibly beautiful women out there that are dreadful to be around. Don't get too superficial, fellas. A little bit of superficiality is natural. We're apes, right? We're looking for all that kind of stuff. But make sure that you find a woman that you enjoy being around, who's witty, who's patient, you know, with your shortcomings and whatnot. Make sure you find a great personality. And I bet eventually, even if she may be a 7 or an 8 on the looks department, she will be a 12 in your department because the rest of it will just be so awesome. I don't know how that rant came out of nowhere. Maybe because this fucking battle is over. I got a little jubilation here. Incidentally, that describes my wife, right? I have one of the most amazing wives in the world. There might be like 2 other wives in the whole world. We'll be humble. There's like 2 probably in the whole world that are as amazing as my wife. Not just beautiful and the body of a college cheerleader at our age, but one of the best personalities of any women I've ever met. All right. We're making levels here. This battle is fucking over. We did a little bit too much bragging about the wife there. Apologies, right? I guess that's, it's going to happen. Sometimes you get a little gushy when you're emotional in a battle like this. But we wrapped this shit up with some fucking victorious music here. This random playlist is playing some perfect tracks for the destruction of this insolent, pathetic Western Empire force here. And 4,000 plus Western Empire forces really got shredded here. I don't know how many losses we suffered. We'll look here in a bit. But we have a massive amount of troops left. And quite frankly, this was I don't want to say a masterpiece, but this was a classic textbook destruction of a force at a bridge defense. Now, I'm aptly suited for this, right? They've got a little bit of a force there, so we're going to be a little bit cautious. We don't need to suffer 200 casualties at the very end here because the recruits turn on us. All right, the battle is over. Obviously, I have scores of defense bridge defenses in my Bannerlord career, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, my Bannerlord tactical bag, and that's the kind of result you get, right? You get no deaths, too. Good. Only one of their nobles died. 442 deaths, and we killed 3,100, and the rest fled. This is a resounding success. Morale and influence and all the shit sky high. You guys like to see some stats, so we'll just wade through that. Now, Wazuban is more of a commander than a warrior in this battle, right? More guys want to see that. Sometimes I like getting my warrior on, but we're also trying to keep Wazuban from getting killed. You have to remember here that we have the death for all cranked way up. So if Wazuban gets knocked unconscious in one of these battles, any of these battles, he could die. We're not save scumming. We're just going to roll with it. Just like we've already lost 2 of our top companions, we will deal with this attrition of warfare here. For the enemy, this was a disastrous war of attrition, right? They made this ambush attempt here. They might have been a lot better off defending the city, but alas, that ship has sailed. Right now we get to attack the city, and I think there'll be a small garrison there and just the militia. No real loot of interest here. Nothing really worth picking up. And loot at this stage doesn't really matter. We get a little autosave here, and we're going to now have the siege of Krasny. Of course, there was no siege of Krasny. The French were just passing through. I will continue sharing some of the paintings as I have for this campaign, because some of the paintings are masterpieces. They are just absolutely gorgeous. And before cameras, this is all we had, right? We have this and eyewitness accounts to these crazy battles, to this epic time that was happening during this Napoleonic retreat from Russia. Again, we're watching the time down there because at Winter 7, we lose more troops, right? Again, we're playing this game, and I will post this little screen from time to time just to remind you of these little checkpoints. We are suffering desertion. We are suffering from the cold. We are suffering from disease, right? We're suffering from mass horrific effects as this Napoleonic campaign elongates and gets deeper into winter. Now, these fucking catapults are taking forever to build, so this is adding stress to this, but I want to at least knock down a few of their fire catapults so we don't suffer 500 casualties taking this city. This is risky. We could definitely be attacked here by an army, and we will roll with that. Think about it, though, right? If I'm heading into this death valley full of snow and horrific conditions and we're suffering losses through attrition, the last thing I need is to lose 500 troops here in the siege and have an army of 600 trying to make our way through this treacherous environment to get to the Beresina River, where we have another siege awaiting us, right? We're going to siege Borisov, which is a town that is prominent in the history of this. I will cover that as well. And I think while we're doing this, and again, I'm doing this slow intentionally so I can sort of mix in these stories. Let's finish Marshal Ney's retreat. Just a 20-second recap. He gets cut off. The Russians cut him off. 60,000 forces, give or take, cannon set up. They're blocking the road between Napoleon and Marshal Ney. Napoleon's forces can't break through Kutuzov's force. Napoleon judges it too risky. Some people in Ney's army felt that they were abandoned here by Napoleon. They were initially mad. So Ney says, fuck it. Fuck you Russians. Fuck everything, right? We're escaping. They cross the Dnieper. There's some reports that they might have built some bridges. Most reports I've read, they had no bridges. So they fucking waded and or swam across this river. Now imagine what that does to your wagons, your supply trains, your fucking food, your muskets. Your powder's got to stay wet, right? All of these things are a problem swimming across this river. The next 50 or 60 miles, as they were assaulted by Cossacks, General Platov and thousands of Cossacks were surrounding this army. And again, it's down to maybe 2,000 stragglers, maybe 3,000 stragglers, and 1,000 fighting men. And they're being surrounded. They have very little equipment. They're freezing to death. They're out of food. And they fucking fight their way through, right? It's one of the most amazing endeavors in this war. Marshal Ney finally does arrive and reunite with Napoleon. I believe they reunited at Minsk, but don't quote me on that. In any case, they reunite with Napoleon, and people are amazed. They're shocked. They just rode off Ney. They're like, he's captured for sure or killed, and he arrives through the forest, right? And I'm going to show you this painting because it encapsulates the effects that they were dealing with, right? Just everybody is on their absolute last fucking tank of fuel, so to speak. They're down to, a couple of cartridges of ammunition. People are starving. People are freezing to death. People are dying and being dragged along because they're suffering from dysentery. And you can just see it in the faces of that painting, that people are in their absolute most primal, I must survive mode, and this fucking superhero, Marshal Ney, and I mean that in the best possible way. You French people, don't misinterpret that. I mean it. This incredible Marshal Ney fights this group of stragglers and war-wounded soldiers through all of this different peril, through forests, through 50 miles of frozen terrain, being harassed by Cossacks and shelled by cannon, and they reunite with Napoleon. It really is one of the best stories from the entire campaign, and so I wanted to talk about it extensively here. Into this siege we go. This should be relatively mundane, although you never know, right? There's 1,000 defenders, although most of them here are militia. We did destroy all of their catapults, but I think they have a ballista or two. And I don't actually have a lot of strategy here. We don't have a lot of strategy because we have ladders. So our strategy here is to fucking take this city, right? We're going to do the Marshal Ney route. Fuck you, Western Empire forces and this militia. We're going to send troops up both of these ladders. Eventually we'll be able to send troops through the fucking door. There's trebuchets in my way. Hopefully that fire catapult does some good damage. If they're not racking up kills, I'm going to go man it as well. I can relate another really interesting story. It's actually a very important part of it that's sort of missed in a lot of historical covering of the Battle of Krasny. and that is the feint attack of the Old Guard, right? Napoleon and his Old Guard, they were starting to be hemmed in finally by the Russians, right? Initially, the Russians were intimidated by Napoleon and his forces. The Old Guard just snickered anytime somebody shot a musket at them. The Old Guard wouldn't even raise their weapons. They're like, yeah, right. Come attack us, bitches. Come get some, right? You got to picture these guys are all alpha males. The Grenadiers and the Old Guard that were with Napoleon, they're specially chosen for their vigor, their experience, their badass nature. These are the Delta Force of this French army. And there's 10 to 15,000 of them, all in exact mirroring uniforms. These guys, of course, were given the best rations, the best tents, the best supplies. They made sure they all had ammunition. All these guys had new boots, etc. And, of course, some of that's maybe an exaggeration, but the point is you need to understand that these guys were in the best shape of all the troops on the battlefield, including, by the way, the Russians. The Russians' forces were obviously also suffering from the Russian winter. All right, so the Russians surround Napoleon somewhat, right? They're menacing Napoleon. They're kind of blocking some of the road. So what does Napoleon do, right? Fuck this. There's a famous quote by him where he says, I have been an emperor long enough. It's time to be a general again. And I'm paraphrasing. But basically, he relinquishes command of the Grand Armée. It's symbolic. But he says, I'm leading this army and my Old Guard. Fuck you, bitches. You Russians want to threaten us? Let me show you what a Napoleon-led Old Guard can do, right? So he comes to the head of the Old Guard. They mount up cannons. They're basically getting into formations to assault and charge these Russian divisions, and it worked, right? It terrified a lot of the Russians. They realized that they were now up against an alpha male, and the French, even though they were in a bedraggled state, they still had some some aces up their sleeve. And all Napoleon was doing here, as I mentioned before, it was a feint attempt. They were basically trying to terrify the Russians. They weren't earnestly trying to commit battle. At least that's the general thought about it. And it worked, right? They lined up in formation, 15,000 guys, 10 to 12, 15,000 guys in their bearskin, whatever, the hats. If you haven't seen them before, it's these tall black hats. It looks pretty badass. And all these guys are tall. These guys are menacing. They got mustaches. They probably got blood splattered all over them from all the war. And they're ready to go, and it worked, right? The Russians hesitated with some of their attacks, and it had the desired effect. Even though we killed some of our own troops there, that had the desired effect too, right? We blow a hole here in the militia to help our troops, and then we're going to join these guys. So the Russians had a chance maybe to destroy Napoleon, and Napoleon bluffed, and it worked, right? It pushed the Russians out of the way. The Old Guard shoved their way through the road, and the majority of the French made it through at Krasny. Now, I want to say majority because something like 25,000 stragglers were captured. And let me cover this for 30 seconds here. Again, this is a run-of-the-mill siege, at least so far here. I'm going to actually see if I can't get through the front door. The stragglers are a very important part of the story. They have been the whole campaign, but now they come to the forefront. You have this fighting force of maybe 30 to 50,000 French, right? The Old Guard, they're still elite units. Marshal Davout. Marshal Davout's force was severely damaged at Krasny. That was one of the casualties, even though it survived. They're in skeleton form at this stage, right? They were 25,000 at the beginning of the campaign. Now they're down to 4,000 or something like that. The French, including Marshal Ney, the rest of the forces here as I butcher this militia. Let me show you guys a two-handed hammer here. Fucking militia, come get some. I'm just going to push my way right the fuck through here. None of you guys represent a threat to Wazuman. He's basically a demigod compared to these guys. Marshal Davout, Marshal Ney, all of these units had stragglers with them. Now, these were everything from criminals to cooks to wives and mistresses of the generals and army soldiers, usually officers. Most of the average soldiers didn't have their wives with them. But there were just tons of civilians. 2/3 maybe of the French living souls, so to speak, at this stage are all civilians. They're cooks, they're blacksmiths, they're doctors, they're fucking people writing about the war and making paintings and shit like that. And so there's tens of thousands. Some estimates at this stage we got some stuck units here. at the battles or skirmishes of Krasny. Some estimates are 60,000 stragglers, right, and tens of thousands of carts, right. You have to picture just an incredible maelstrom of horse-drawn carriages, all kinds of civilians, freezing mistresses that really wish that they had just married some nice guy in Paris, rather than be in this maelstrom of death, disease, and carnage. And it's going to become a major part of the problem. They're dealing with wounded soldiers, people who can't walk. They're dealing with people with dysentery, and what you get is a scene of absolute pandemonium. We'll look a little overhead on this battle here. We'll simulate this is the village of Krasny, right? We're shoving our way through with our old guard here in a smashingly successful siege assault here. So far, so good, right? Our army is definitely being diminished. Another 47 dead. The war of attrition continues to take its bites, but they're small bites, right? These are manageable bites, and vitally, nobody died, right? Nobody was knocked unconscious or died there. I think we'll just fight this last stage here. I think we'll just blaze through this as I finish that point about the stragglers. The stragglers also include lots of thieves and people who are effectively, they are rogue. And what I mean by that is that there's no law and order. Initially in an army, there'd be discipline. There'd be people even hanged if they stole or were, I don't know, if they were sort of pretending like they were part of the army. There'd be penalties. These guys might be put in cuffs. Now, there's very little law enforcement. The French don't have the resource to do it. And there's so many stragglers, it's a little bit like 1,000 people speeding on a highway. The cops can't pull anybody over because there's too much of a problem to deal with. So these stragglers are now stealing food. With the cold, they're stealing food, they're stealing cloaks. There's plenty of accounts of people, they would put their jacket down for a minute to wash themselves by a river. They would turn around a minute later and their jacket is gone, they see nobody, and so they go that night without their they call them like great coats or something like that. It's basically like a gigantic, thick, insulated, usually not like winter ready, but like a really sturdy rain jacket, right? They had some insulatory protection. Some soldiers had better protection than others. And in this next section, I will talk more about that. But these stragglers are causing carnage. They're getting in the way. They're getting killed. They're screaming. They're panicking easily. Every time the Cossacks would come up and menace the army with forces, these people would scream and run and try to hide behind anybody with a musket. You get a sense of chaos. And not even just a sense of chaos, it is chaos. Some of these people would run off into the forest and they'd get cut down by Cossacks. What a gift this is here. There's more food, which is going to help us deal with the war of attrition here, right? We have at least one more food checkpoint, maybe two more food checkpoints. And the food, actually, we're doing better than I thought. Which is okay, right? We're dealing with other consequences, but we're still going to have deserters no matter what. Now I'm not gonna waste your time with this again. We're gonna spread some troops around here. This will just take a second, and we'll be right back. All right, as we leave Krasny here, simulated Krasny. Of course, this is just the city of Epicrotia. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff happening behind the scenes here. Of course, it's very important to understand that what's happening doesn't always make logical sense because there are agendas at play. We see this snow here. We'll talk a little bit more about how our troops are suffering in the snow. Obviously, the battles of Krasny were very damaging to the Napoleonic army, but it's worth mentioning that the Russian army suffered as well. A big thing to understand is that the Russian army is not what it seems. In other words, the numbers don't apply, right? You know, when you destroy an army of a bunch of recruits and it's just like you win a battle where you're outnumbering them 4-1, a lot of times the quality of the units is more important than the quantity. And that was happening in this stage of the Russian campaign with the Napoleonic army. I'm specifically referring to the army of that Kutuzov. Mikhail Kutuzov had this army of about 60,000 troops, and he was severely chastised both by historians afterwards, but also the Tsar of Russia, Alexander, was very unhappy at this stage that his main general wasn't being super aggressive and trying to destroy Napoleon. Now I'm also going to do a few things here in the background while I just sort of tell you about the geopolitics. Understand we're doing one of these, we'll call these one of these degradation days where we lose 75 troops and 6,000 food, right? These things, I will flash this little thing on the screen with after narration that essentially explains this part. But if you've been watching the series, you get this by now. We are simulating that the snow is causing disease, is causing fatalities, and indeed it was, right? And I'll talk more about that when we get a moment. So back to the geopolitics here. Now, there's multiple reasons why Kutuzov may not have engaged and really tried to cut off and destroy the Napoleonic army. The most basic one, I think, and most historians tend to agree with this, is that the Russian army was not the match of the French, right? They had already been hammered at Borodino, and importantly, a lot of the toughest Russian troops had been destroyed at Borodino, right? They were now down to their, you could think of it in the Bannerlord terms, their tier 2 and lower units, right? You're not about to attack a bunch of legionaries with your bowl cut militia and stuff like that and hope for success. So Kutuzov had this army of 65,000, but half the army, by most accounts that I've read, half the army at this stage are literally guys that have basically been conscripted in the last 2 or 3 months, and that's worth touching on briefly as well. Understand that most of the French army are volunteers, and most of the Russian army are serfs who are ordered to fight, right? This is very important when it comes to their motives and how they're going to fight. Right, you're clearly going to get, generally, not always, but most of the time, you're going to get a better response from people who are voluntarily fighting than those people who just feel like they're fighting for their oligarchic lords. The serfs in Russia were definitely being mistreated compared to the French. So Kutuzov waited, did not attack. There were multiple opportunities where the French were spread out, like I've said, at Krasny, and he didn't engage. He made a few sort of glancing engagements, but he didn't fully engage his army. There's some speculation that he may have been under orders from Alexander to not destroy the Russian army. And that was because the third reason, there's also another little conspiracy reason I'll tell you about in a second while I do these perks. But the main reason is that the Russians anticipated a high probability of the Napoleonic army being surrounded and destroyed, capturing Napoleon. I need to talk briefly about this. I don't have a bunch of fancy maps. I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can find around the internet and put up on the screen at opportune times. But just think about it from this perspective. The French are trying to retreat from Russia, and they are hundreds of miles into Russia. And the Russians are aware of that. Well, the Russian armies that were being fended off by Field Marshal Schwarzenberg, Swami Samsonite, and the other armies, there was a Polish army holding some units back. Basically, these armies started to crimp in on Napoleon's flanks and close off his retreat. At this stage, there were almost four armies. One of them was a smaller army, but basically 3.5 large armies of Russians, almost all the same size as Napoleon, and some of the armies that were further west, Wittgenstein was one of them. Chichagov had a large army of like 40 or 50,000. These armies had some veterans still, right? They had not seen the heavy-duty fighting that Kutuzov's army had dealt with. Even though we're suffering some relation here, I'm just going to every single village, by the way, and just telling us we need your troops because we're suffering this desertion. I'm trying to sort of deal with this difficult desertion effect that I've put on myself and hope I don't get attacked here by Western Empire forces. I'm also stalling here because I'm trying to heal, even though I know I'm losing troops due to time and losing food, and I'm sort of racing against the clock here. If I go into this valley and get trapped by an army or two, and our army isn't at full strength, we're doomed. So that was the other reason that Kutuzov probably didn't engage, is that they fully anticipated being able to trap the French at a place probably near the Beresina River, and we will talk about that soon. A last sort of conspiracy reason is that there's some people who believe that Kutuzov and the higher-ups in the Russian echelon didn't think it was a good idea to completely destroy the French army because that might unbalance the war, sort of the global power, the balance of power, I guess is the word I'm searching for, in favor of England, right? You'd be surprised to understand that sometimes you wouldn't want to help even a country you're allied with too much because suddenly they would become the dominant power, right? People just wanted to restore France to where she was 10, 15, 20 years ago and not have this juggernaut revolutionary army led by a maniacal megalomaniac god of war rampaging about Europe, right? Everybody knew Napoleon had to be stopped. All right, so now that you've caught up on some geopolitics here, we're going to crawl between villages. Let's talk about the weather. Let's spend a few minutes on the weather. The weather at this stage is dreadful, right? It's the middle towards the end of November. I'm looking at my thing there. Hello, we've got a huge fucking sturgeon army. It's one guy, but it reminds me of that scene from Kingdom of Heaven where he says it's one guy, and he's like, no, they're all here. So I wasn't sure which route I was going to take. I'm probably going to cut down in this valley, but either way, this fucking guy is cutting us off here. You know, and there could be armies behind him. I don't have a lot of time to stall. I could try this little side route up here, and there's like a back door. But I think we will either try to sneak by this guy or just fight, right? You guys probably want me to fight. You guys probably want all the challenges, all you can eat, right? All you can eat carnage. This valley does have some good tactical opportunities because I stalled, and what perfect way to talk about how brilliant I am, right? But I did talk about how it was important to heal before I went down in this valley where I could get trapped, and lo and behold, you know, that has proven wise. Now, I don't have any other armies I can call here. Actually, I have one other army, but he's days away. This is what we got, right? And our army, of course, at this stage is highly attritioned. However, just like Napoleon, we still have our main guard. We still have the old guard. We still have 500 troops with Wazuban. I'm going to try to sneak by this guy here. I know it's not the most valiant thing to do. We're probably going to get attacked anyways, but I'm going to try to sneak by. He's actually coming up to siege Krasny, so maybe he'll just continue on with his business there. And we can just hide over in the trees here, you know, thousands of troops. Nah, definitely not. They're all, in fact, these other armies are fucking coming in for the kill. And we have battle here. 3,400 sturgeon. What else is here? It looks like there's a Valandian force. We got our hands full. Actually, Orig and Karsten, are these guys? I think Karsten is one of the Nemesis guys for sure. He is. This is one of the Nemesis characters. So we'll see if he plays out in this, right? This guy's, look at his stats. This guy's a god of warfare, basically. And we've had a handful of encounters against the Nemesis, but to be perfectly honest, I haven't had quite the impact I was hoping for these guys to have, right? These artificially enhanced enemy characters, I was hoping they would be something like a big antagonist on the battlefield. Now, for a battle like this, you know, I've been kind of going back and forth with the banner. It sort of depends on the battle, but Sturgia, right? Tons of infantry. Let's go decrease taken melee damage. I think that'll help the most because I'll probably be waiting around with my two-handed hammer here, right? This is a very bad spot to be in. There are good spots of this valley, and this is a bad spot. There's no cover. I have a little tiny ridge up there I can use. Of course, the center of the valley is where we're going to try to pin the enemy, hem the enemy in. We will bait them with an infantry division, but this is going to be difficult. In fact, like I often do, I got to remind, I kind of slump. I've got this posture issue sitting in my chair here. We are going to sit up straight here because every single one of these battles may be the last battle. Now, if this is a 2-hour episode and this is an hour into it, I suppose you guys can, a little bit of spoiler there. But here we go. All right, so 6th Division, let's do some skirmishers and shock troops. I'm going to try to envelop the enemy, of course, right? We're going to try to bait them. And what I really want is I want to get their infantry overextended, right? I want them chasing some of our units, and then we will cut them off with cavalry and then an infantry division, right? Basically slide in shock troops behind them with cavalry shield walls in front of those guys to protect them from archers, and then those guys can go to work, right? Two-handed axes and manavletons bobbing up and down, and that should do beautifully. So 4th Corps is still the crossbow. I like to have that defensive division, plus very early on in a battle like this, they turn into decent little infantrymen. 5th Corps archers will probably hold in the center, and then the 6th I'm going to pull up onto our right. It's a fucking gorgeous battlefield. It has all this reflective ice and shit. The effects in Bannerlord really are a 10 out of 10, or maybe they're a 9 out of 10. They're terrific, though. So I got some rock outcroppings we can use. That'll make it more difficult for their cavalry to get in here. And I do have a good amount of all units, right? We have a good amount of cavalry, infantry, and archers. A little bit of their advantage in numbers here is mitigated by the fact that it's narrow, right? They don't have a huge field to wrap us up with an army of 1,500 troops. It's kind of narrow, and so a little bit like Thermopylae, the sturgeons here can get funneled. Now try to get this 6th Corps up here, tucked in here with me, and we're basically just going to hold this spot, right? I got a cav division in front of us, and that'll limit how much units get up here. And of course, anything that gets up into here, they're going to face very nasty shock troops face to face. Half of our army here has extra hit points, right? It's like literally is twice as strong as the enemy troops because they have so many hit points. That's an important consideration in all of these battles. It's part of the reason we're winning battles you would normally lose. And I don't mean you, I just mean that anybody would normally lose. You got some dipshit by himself coming in as usual. And they've got a mix. I see a bunch of cavalry leading out front, but they're kind of going slow in shield wall because they're facing a barrage of arrows. Got the 1st and 3rd. So we still have shield and shock on the left flank, right? I've got those shock troops tucked in behind there. We have 2 shock divisions, right? We basically, we have, oh no, I beg your pardon, we don't. I forgot the 7th is archers. I was thinking we had 3 horse archer divisions. We do have 2 shock troop divisions. All right, so the javelins are flinging, and their cavalry's coming first, and they're just meeting an onslaught of javelins, right? These guys, every guy here was chucking a javelin up at the horses attacking our forces up there. The cavalry's doing a beautiful job over here slowing them down. Let's move the 3rd and 2nd tighter in there so that the enemy has a hard time getting through. You see those guys flinging javelins up at those cavalry up there. Let's get those guys even closer, right? You do more damage uprange. So let's get our guys to crowd those motherfuckers. These guys right here, this cavalry can't do shit, right? Anytime I want, we could just charge with this infantry. Right now, I want these guys holding a line because it's that infantry wave I'm worried about. They have a gigantic zerg of infantry coming, and I want to bait them with this 1st division. So let's pull the 6th as tight as we can up here. Let's back the 1st and the 5th up. We can also get this 7th division backed off quite a bit. They're almost like a reserve archer division. The 1st and 5th has got to get backed way the fuck up. That way they don't get caught. In fact, some of them might be getting caught. I think I might have... It's right on the edge of them being caught. Now, the good thing is that the enemy's in a shield wall. We're not, right? Because they're worried about all our arrows. So a lot of our infantry is going to be okay there. And that aggressive pursuit just killed the enemy. Look at how aggressive they are charging in there against the 1st Corps. I didn't mean to bait them like that, but it's actually working beautifully well because the enemy is just like, they smell blood, right? They're like a fucking college freshman when they smell sex. They just instantly aroused. So in we go here, right? The shock troops, just like I wanted. We're a touch late, although the enemy just did me a favor and kept engaging. So in we go here, swing a few fists at him, and the 6th Corps and I go bellowing, kicking the air, making a fool of myself here as we bore in on this sturgeon force. Look at our shock troops are fully behind the enemy. I mean, what a nightmare for the enemy. They're trying to defend, and now they're cut off, right? There's cavalry here protecting us from cav charges. Archers are shredding everything, and now these shock troop guys go to work. Most of these sturgeons are dead men. All right, let's aggressively move up here. They've got archer divisions. Let's stick cav in their face on both sides. I've kept my shield for this battle. It's just nice to have. I'm basically protected from both, right? Reduced melee damage and a shield. You just don't have a lot that'll kill you. Maybe if there was like a Chernobyl incident, I don't have any. There's no iodine. I don't have any iodine tablets, but everything else I'm pretty well protected from. Cav division's moving up here. I've got the 2nd and 8th I can move. The 7th is a reserve archer division. I'm just going to use them to heavy flank the enemy. This battle's obviously not over. Even though that first wave there, we decimated their cav and infantry. They had actually over 3,000 troops, right? So this is just getting started here. Can't get too excited just by one round, and who knows what kind of troops these later tiers are going to have. It might be mostly elite troops. That's just the campaign we're in. All right, archers continue to work. They've got a line of archers here trying to repel us, but we've got way more archers, right? We're not going to stop for these guys. In fact, they panicked as soon as they saw executioner axes bobbing up and down in their direction. Those guys fled. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to flank with the 7th and 5th. On our right flank here, I'm going to put these guys up on the hill, and we're going to flank the shit out of the enemy. No point in wasting ammo there. They might have hit a few rounds off, but most of those archers, I actually want them moving and not shooting. The cav can do the pursuing, right? Get in there, Marshal Murat, kill him. Okay, they got a giant amount of reinforcements. Look like 400 archers. I'm getting trampled by my own troops here. Come on, fellas. Have a little respect here. All right, so they're forming up over that ridge. Fuck no, we're not going to let them get any kind of initiative on that ridge, right? We're going to get our archers spread out here on the other side there. I can see shock troops just cutting down the enemy left and right. I love it. All right, this lower area, we'll put the 4th archers, right? Those guys will be shooting uphill, but that's okay. It's another crosshair on the enemy. They've got a small cav division sort of holding their left, but that's just of no threat to us at all at this stage. We've got a cav division here we can quickly counter. I'm just not concerned, and almost like they know they can't do anything, they're peeling back. Let's get the 7th and 5th up on this bank here. The 6th we can continue to sort of pull. I'm kind of pulling the 6th division this whole battle because I want them near me, right? I want these shock troops basically being like my old guard, right? This is Napoleon's old guard here. Let's get the infantry right in their face as well. Any javelins that haven't been chucked can be chucked. The cav down there, of course, is... You hear weapons hitting them, right? Throwing weapons and stuff like that. I see a feeble enemy lord down there kind of trying to attack, but this enemy's in for a rude awakening here. In fact, we're going to get highly aggressive here. Look at that shit. They have 600 and something troops piled up on that hill. We're going to surround it, right? In fact, I don't even need to shoot so much. We're just going to, what we're going to do is we're going to hopscotch our archers here and get cav behind this fucking enemy. Let's push these 8th Corps all the way behind them, right? This is the disadvantage that the AI has in situations like this. It really needs to be spreading out. Instead, they're just compacted in a death ball. Right, so we'll move the infantry up systematically. 1st and 3rd shield and shock. The archers are now spreading out behind me. We're completely blocking the enemy's retreat now with the 8th Corps. They're just in a 4 deep line of cavalry. Now they're vulnerable, right? They're being speared in the back by enemy cavalry, but I think that's worth it. It's worth it to me anyways. Maybe not to them, but it's worth it to me. I'm going to try to surround them with the 5th and 7th Corps here. The 4th and 6th are down the valley. The 1st and 3rd will be told to charge soon, right? I want these guys advancing, but not yet, right? I don't want the enemy damaging and destroying our infantry divisions when our archers can do work too. Let's bring up these archers. The enemy's totally penned up over there. I mean, I'm barely even holding up my shields because they're just not shooting. You can't shoot when there's a guy's fucking penis laying over your fucking bow. They're just so tightly packed in there that they can't do shit. Our cav behind them here in a square, or in a shield wall rather, that'll just basically hold the enemy from getting, they're basically getting slaughtered. They're penned up, and now our infantry is boring in. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, of course, I understand the AI is not exactly state-of-the-art here, but this kind of manipulation of it always feels like a fucking, like a work of art. Let's move this 7th Division up. The 5th and 6th Division should be basically right behind me, right? I don't see them yet, but I know they're moving this way. And all of those sturgeons are dead. Not a single guy there is gonna survive, right? We're blocking him with cavalry. Anybody who's tried to run through a whole bunch of cavalry, you can't get through. Let's see. So those guys are dead there. The infantry's boring in. The screen is flushing green. The 6th Corps is here with me. We might as well kill with them. And let's get an archer division and a cav division around this rock where I'm standing here. That way we can cut off the next line of reinforcements, right? You're just one step ahead of the enemy here the whole time. I don't really have a good division to divide them to, so this 1st division just became a quasi-infantry division. Let's pull this 5th over the edge of this ridge and finish this massacre. I mean, the enemy is just being swallowed up there. Look at our 8th division is just holding that square. Our troops are roaring. That's the immersive battlefield mod, for anybody wondering. That's absolutely one of the most essential mods in Bannerlord. It's just an atmospheric mod. It doesn't do anything. It just, you need these yelling and screaming in a big battle like this, right? I don't think I can play without it at this stage. Now, they do have a bunch of infantry down there, right? These guys are going to be chucking javelins up here by the thousands. Almost as soon as I said that, I'm getting hit with javelins. That's okay, right? I've got infantry here with me. We'll just hold our shield up while the rest of their forces get scorched. And archers are coming in behind me here, right? These guys are going to have counterfire. This 2nd division can bore down here as well. Look at, they just got reinforcements popped up right in the middle. The archers probably instantly shot these guys. There's a little cav charge coming here. Of course, the enemy has a massive amount of troops, but we just have them so fucking checkmated here. I got 9 javelins in my shield, and I think it's time for Warrior Wazuban to enter the fray here, right? We've been a general long enough in this battle. Let's lead the way here for our 6th and 1st Corps. Fuck you, bitches. Come get some. My hammer's going to splatter some sturgeon blood all over the ground today. And this is a good thing to talk about. When you get to this stage of 330 athletics and a hammer like this, you are virtually untouchable on the battlefield. I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing. I'm not going to face any single unit. I'm just going to club guys and move on. Club them and move on. Anybody who turns at you or chases, just keep moving. They can't catch you, or they're plinking you for 1 damage from behind. Meanwhile, you find a new target to smash with your hammer. Every once in a while, you get stood up just a little bit. Just keep moving. You know, and you got accumulated javelins behind you, and the enemy, all these guys that are chasing you are also basically out of the battle, right? Because they're chasing you instead of attacking somebody else. So not only are you killing all these guys, but you're immobilizing another half dozen guys. Oh shit. Little bit of cheat code fucking enemies out of the ground for the enemy there, but that's not going to matter at all, right? These guys are now tier 3, tier 2. We've got archers positioned on a high ridge right over their spawn point. It feels a little bit like cheese, but it is what it is, right? So is cheese is the enemy popping out of the ground, right? And that's simply happening because we're at the back of the map, right? We have chased this sturgeon force to the very back of the map, and there is nowhere else for them to spawn. In fact, there is nowhere for them to go except to all die, right? This sturgeon force is exterminated. There's fucking glorious music playing as this blue carpet of troops run as fast as they can for the exit point. Fucking love it. There's almost an emotional joy you get out of Bannerlord from having a battle like this, where theoretically it's a really hard battle, and instead it's just a fucking complete carving, slicing, dicing, kill them all, morale improving fucking massacre. There's camels rampaging around. I love it. We're suffering some losses here at the end. Maybe we got a little bit sloppy, but after the work we did earlier, I'm just fine with that, right? And under 500 casualties here. 2 more big losses, right? These are, maybe they're not big losses, but 2 more nobles died from our army. But that's just par for the course, right? We have Death for All cranked up, and we're rolling with whatever happens, right? Fortunately, Wazuban can't be killed when he still has his hammer in his hand. This is a total gift, and part of me wants to not use it, but we're gonna. I'm just gonna. Those will be troops that we disband at our next, whatever you want to call it. Again, our deserter disease checkpoint. So big sigh of relief here. Again, every single one of these battles is do or die. We're not save scumming. We're just rolling on. Of course, I'm narrating live. So we're just going to do the best we can here. You're going to hear me go through the emotions of this campaign. And, you know, we're role-playing, but it's not that different from what Napoleon was probably facing, right? The army at this stage, the stress must have been to the maximum. In fact, I'm going to try to talk about the weather and some of the effects that were happening to people at this stage of the campaign. You know, we're after Krasny. We're in between Krasny and the Beresina River here. I guess there could be more battles. You know, we're sort of vulnerable. We have 700 troops, but it also sort of seems like the enemy might have just shot their wad there. That was a big force. So we're going to get some troops here to our little troop carrier here. This guy's holding troops for me so that I can disband him. Take some of his better looking troops here. We are clearly suffering the war of attrition, right? Wazuban doesn't even have 500 troops now. And frankly, I don't know if we have 500 elite troops. I don't see any big chunks of troops. Who else has them? Maybe Arwa has a few good troops, but we're starting to look pretty ragged here, right? And so was Napoleon's army, right? That leads perfectly into talking about that. 650,000 is one of the high-end estimates for Napoleon's army at the beginning. So this guy's got some palace guards. Beautiful. 650,000 for Napoleon at the beginning of this invasion. At this stage between Krasny and the Beresina, reports vary, but I've seen 35,000, 45,000. And this is fighting men. Understand that there's probably 150,000 total people, but a lot of them, most of them at this stage are non-combatants, which makes it chaotic, right? Because you have all these civilians in the way. You got women giving birth on this fucking frozen trail simply because they have no other choice, right? You really feel for the civilians in this situation. Of course, there's all kinds of hangers on, and there's literally thieves that would just pop in from a Russian village impersonate that they were part of the army, steal, and then ditch the army. There were spies, there were everything. Blacksmiths, there were fucking scouts, there were all the servants for all the nobility. What's this shit? Why do I have a bunch of hides? I have no idea why we have hides still. Dump all that off. I don't know if that was a bug or what. But it's a chaotic scene, right? And food is very dear at this stage. You have to understand that all those logistical things that Napoleon did early in the campaign are starting to break down, right? Your logistics trains are breaking down. Fourth Corps was trying to get to a supply depot. I think that was Poniatowski or something like that. Apologies. I will try to get his name correct before the next segment of this. But there was a famous Polish leader, very, very, very loyal to Napoleon, and he was leading the Fourth Corps, and they were sent to get supplies, and they had a disastrous time trying to get over a river. I guess I can cover it in 30 seconds. They tried to cross this river, and the Cossacks, right? You have to remember the Cossacks are always following the French. This large army of Cossacks, so that might be 1,000 with some cannon, they unlimbered their guns, and while this Fourth Corps is trying to cross this river, the ice was cracking, people were falling into the river, people are dying by the hundreds. They're trying to push cannons over, and now they're getting shelled by these Cossacks. It's just a nightmare situation. People are drowning. They dumped a bunch of the baggage trains and most of the cannons. They spiked them and said, fuck it, we're out of here, and they rejoined Napoleon's army. Much more disheveled, with most of their supplies gone, very little food, very little ammo, and none of the cannons, and another horrifically disastrous event for their morale, right? So it's literally just one thing after another. Now, shelter, right? Your average soldier had no shelter at all, zero. If you're wondering how come they don't have better clothing, that's because most of the time warfare is not fought at this time of the world, right? The early 1800s was not fought very often in winter. They literally had a season, almost like a baseball season, where it would be March and April is like spring training, and then you start to get on the March and May. You'd have your big battles in June and July, and then everybody would be home in their fucking chateaus or their little huts by October, November, usually, right? Obviously not in this case. Now, of course, the French didn't expect to be there, but nevertheless, they still didn't have winter clothing. So guys are literally sleeping huddled together with bad clothing, right? And at this stage, they were obviously doing everything they could to stay warm. They were tying ladies' underwear around them. They had 7 layers tied all around them. To hell with gifts for the girlfriend, right? They were using all those minks and stuff like that as warming devices, right? It was absolutely every man for himself. You put your jacket down or your hat down for a second, it's gone the next. People are literally stealing and killing people at night. So the situation is extraordinarily grim at this stage. And I think, what we'll do? We'll wander around this town just to sort of simulate that. All right, friends, we're going to wrap this episode up here. I'm just going to sort of finish with this summary as we explore some of these snowy landscapes that Wazuban was dealing with in this campaign. Of course, this campaign still has another stage to go. So even though you might have felt this was the last episode, to avoid making this a 3.5 or 4 hour episode, we're going to go ahead and break these episodes up. But there is more content coming. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this campaign. Obviously you guys can tell at this stage that I'm very passionate about not just Napoleon, but especially this fascinating 1812 endeavor, this monstrously difficult campaign, all of the logistics involved with moving 700,000 troops, and then of course them dealing with the most extreme conditions conceivable, right? For an army of highly unprepared people to deal with blizzard conditions such as this. I find a serenity in outdoor environments like this, but of course the French were dealing with anything but serenity. Death and desertion and all kinds of other chaos. So this series is going to wrap up with one more episode. Fans of history probably know we're going to be having some issues at the Berezina River. I will cover extensively what happened there. I will do my very best to continue to convey some of the conditions, realities, and anecdotal stories from the people that were on the campaign with Napoleon. I will talk extensively, and then we will also talk about the historical battle of the Berezina. I appreciate you guys. Of course, if you want to spread this to anybody you know who might want to watch something like this or learn more about the history of the Napoleonic campaign, I really appreciate that. You guys can all help me a lot just by hitting that like button if you don't want to do the extra legwork. I appreciate you fellas. This historical campaign has been really interesting for me to play around with. There may be more if the response is good and you guys want to see more. Of course, it takes me a lot of work, but it's a labor of love, to be sure. So with all that said, I will shut the fuck up now and let you guys go. Thanks again for watching, fellas. Talk to you guys next time.